In March 536 AD, the world plunged into a silent nightmare. Residents of Constantinople, Rome, and distant China awoke under a sky veiled in a strange, dense, sulphurous haze. The sun no longer gave warmth or bright light. Procopius of Caesarea, a Byzantine historian, recorded in his chronicles, "The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year. For the next 18 months, day was barely distinguishable from night." This was no ordinary eclipse lasting just a few minutes. The vault of the sky turned into a dim, pale bronze plate that radiated chilling cold. Birds stopped singing, livestock thrashed in their pens in distress, and people peered into the darkening heavens, unable to comprehend which god had unleashed their wrath. The great luminary that had granted life to civilizations for millennia had simply gone dark. Without solar heat, the planet's climatic clock ground to a halt. Temperatures dropped by several degrees, triggering the most severe cooling spell of the last 2,000 years. In the middle of summer, snow fell across Europe and China. Unripened crops of wheat and rye rotted right in the fields, turning into a black sludge. A wave of devastating famine swept across every continent, tearing apart the remaining threads of social cohesion. Merchant ships arrived in deserted ports carrying dead crews, and panic mounted in the streets of great cities. No one yet knew that this anomaly was merely the beginning of a 30-year period of darkness and calamity. The dust veil had obscured more than just the sun. It had permanently blocked out the dying ancient world, plunging humanity into the deep abyss of the Dark Ages. For centuries, the global sky of 536 Anno Domini remained a terrifying supernatural mystery. Ancient survivors believed the sun was mourning or that the cosmos itself was unwinding into primordial chaos. Modern science, however, has excavated the truth buried deep within the ice sheets of Greenland and the Swiss Alps. Ultra-precise ice core extractions revealed high concentrations of volcanic sulfur deposited precisely in early 536 AD. A colossal volcanic cataclysm, likely in North America or El Salvador, had violently erupted with the force of thousands of atomic bombs. Millions of tons of fine sulfate aerosols were blasted high into the stratosphere, far above the reach of rain clouds. The high-altitude winds caught this lethal veil and blanketed the entire northern hemisphere within weeks. The planet's primary energy source was effectively severed by a cloud of microscopic volcanic glass and sulfur. As if the gods were compounding the punishment, a second massive eruption struck in 540 AD. This double volcanic blow locked the Earth into a prolonged climate anomaly known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age. Oceans cooled rapidly, altering global air currents and disrupting monsoon cycles across Asia and Africa. Solar radiation dropped by up to 25%, suffocating photosynthesis and starving ecosystem food chains. In the Americas, severe droughts brought the ancient Mochi civilization to its knees as rivers ran dry. In Europe, the sudden drop in temperature pushed nomadic steppe tribes westward into Roman territory in search of grazing land. The physical atmosphere of the planet had turned hostile, setting off a cascading chain of ecological collapses. Human civilization was about to discover just how fragile its golden empires truly were under a sunless sky. The year 536 AD offered no summer warmth, only an unrelenting, bitter chill. Across the northern hemisphere, agricultural cycles that had sustained human life for millennia completely collapsed. In Ireland, historical annals recorded a total failure of bread production from 536 to 539 AD. In China, yellow dust fell from the sky like ash, followed by severe August frosts that destroyed the grain harvest. Chinese chronicles speak of mass starvation where over 70% of the population in northern provinces perished. The lack of sunlight prevented crops from ripening, turning vast golden wheat fields into rotting, waterlogged swamps. Livestock died by the millions as pastures froze over and fodder supplies evaporated. Communities that had managed to store small reserves of grain soon found themselves under siege by starving neighbors. The basic biological engine of human civilization had been abruptly brought to a standstill. As hunger gnawed at the foundations of society, human behavior grew increasingly desperate. Peasant families abandoned their ancestral lands, wandering down frozen roads in a hopeless search for food. Major cities, once vibrant centers of trade and culture, transformed into desolate zones of chaos and despair. Governance broke down as tax revenues collapsed, and imperial armies could no longer be fed or paid. In many regions, the desperate populations turned to cannibalism or fled into the wilderness to forage for roots and bark. The social contract between rulers and subjects dissolved. No king or emperor could command loyalty when he could not provide bread. The cold was not merely a seasonal hardship. It was an existential executioner. Human society was stripping itself down to raw survival, unaware that an even deadlier shadow was silently approaching from the sea. As if climate catastrophe and mass starvation were not enough, an invisible predator emerged from the shadows. In 541 AD, the plague bacteria Yersinia pestis struck the port of Pelusium in Egypt. Carried by flea-ridden rats aboard grain ships, the infection swept rapidly across the Mediterranean trade routes. It arrived in Constantinople at the height of Emperor Justinian's dream to reunite the Roman Empire. The result was apocalyptic. At its peak, the plague claimed up to 10,000 lives a day in the imperial capital alone. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried, forcing authorities to stuff city towers and barges with decaying corpses. The cold, sunless sky had already weakened the immune systems of millions, making the human population the perfect biological target for the first recorded bubonic plague pandemic in history. The Justinianic plague did not just kill individuals, it paralyzed the entire infrastructure of the ancient Mediterranean. Fields went unharvested, army ranks dissolved, and tax collection ground to a total halt. Emperor Justinian himself contracted the disease but barely survived, his grand ambition of a restored Roman world shattered forever. Over the course of 2 centuries, the pandemic would claim an estimated 25 to 50 million lives, nearly half the population of Europe and the Middle East. The combination of volcanic winter and global pestilence created a lethal double shock from which the ancient order could never recover. Cities shrank into fortified villages, trade routes fell silent, and human confidence in divine favor disintegrated into raw horror. The stage was set for the dark age that followed. The twin cataclysms of climate disruption and global pestilence shattered the geopolitical spine of the ancient world. Empires that had endured for centuries collapsed like hollow shells under the weight of economic ruin and population loss. In Europe, the precarious remnants of Western civilization collapsed into localized feudal warlordism. The Byzantine Empire lost over a third of its population, forcing it to abandon territorial ambitions and retreat into defensive survival. Across the Eurasian continent, vast tribal migrations accelerated as ecological collapse pushed starving populations across borders. In Asia, the Rouran Khaganate crumbled under internal revolts and harsh winters, giving rise to the First Turkic Khaganate. The global trade networks of the Silk Road fragmented into isolated, dangerous pockets of regional barter. The sophisticated machinery of global antiquity was unraveling at every seam. In the Americas, complex societies faced their own silent collapse. The majestic metropolis of Teotihuacan experienced massive social unrest and fires as drought crippled its agricultural hinterlands. Further south, the Moche civilization fractured as changing ocean currents brought relentless flash floods, followed by decades of megadrought. From the Mediterranean to Mesoamerica, divine kingship lost its legitimacy when gods failed to bring back the sun or heal the sick. Monumental architecture ceased, literacy rates plunged, and ancient knowledge dissolved into urban ruins. It was not a sudden, single war that destroyed antiquity, but a slow, suffocating decay driven by a changing sky. The grand old world was dead, leaving behind a scarred planet and a fragmented human race searching for light in the dark. Following the darkness and pestilence, a profound silence descended upon human history. The mid-6th century marked the beginning of an era where historical records drastically thinned out. Monasteries and scribal centers, once bustling with the preservation of knowledge, fell silent or were abandoned altogether. Complex engineering skills, from building grand stone aqueducts to manufacturing high-grade pottery, were lost within a single generation. Across Europe, populations withdrew into isolated rural settlements, erecting wooden palisades against a hostile world. Urban centers that once housed hundreds of thousands shrank into tiny, fortified villages surrounded by ancient ruins. The grand philosophical debates of antiquity gave way to a singular, brutal focus: daily survival. A blanket of darkness had settled not just over the climate, but over the collective memory of mankind. Yet, within this long age of silence, subtle seeds of a new world order began to take root. The decline of old imperial powers created a vacuum that reshaped global culture forever. In the isolated deserts of Arabia, trade routes shifted, laying the geographic foundations for the rise of Islam in the next century. In Western Europe, localized communities began forming the decentralized structures that would eventually define the medieval era. The planet's ecosystem slowly began to heal as human industrial activity and deforestation ground to a halt. Forests reclaimed abandoned farmland, and carbon levels shifted in response to the global population drop. Humanity had survived its darkest trial, but the world that emerged from the shadow was fundamentally altered. The silence was not total death, it was the quiet, painful incubation of a new epoch. For over 14 centuries, the true cause of the 536 AD disaster remained locked in shadow. Ancient written chronicles provided vivid accounts of the gloom, but could not pinpoint the physical catalyst. The breakthrough came in the 21st century through ultra-precise climate forensics. Glaciologists drilling deep into the polar ice of Greenland and the Swiss Alps extracted pristine ice cores. These icy time capsules preserve microscopic layers of atmospheric fallout deposited year after year. Using laser ultra-high-resolution analysis, scientists detected massive volcanic sulfur spikes precisely dated to early 536 AD. Chemical fingerprints confirmed a colossal eruption in the northern hemisphere, followed by a second eruption in 540 AD. The mystery that baffled medieval chroniclers was finally solved by reading the frozen pages of Earth's history. The ice cores revealed more than just volcanic ash. They recorded the complete economic collapse of human society. In the ice layers corresponding to the mid-6th century, airborne lead pollution dropped to near zero levels. Silver smelting and atmospheric metal processing, the lifeblood of ancient coinage and trade, had completely stopped. For decades, the air remained pristine only because human industrial activity had reached a catastrophic standstill. It was not until around 564 AD that lead levels began to rise again, marking the slow rebirth of silver mining and commerce. The frozen glaciers had preserved an unbiased, high-resolution audit of human suffering and recovery. Science had bridged the gap across 1,400 years, transforming an ancient apocalyptic myth into measurable physical truth. The Earth had kept the receipts of its darkest year all along. The year 536 AD stands as a humbling reminder of human vulnerability before the forces of nature. We tend to view our civilizations as invincible monuments, carved in stone and bound by law. Yet, the events of the 6th century demonstrate how quickly complex human systems can crumble when the environment shifts. A single geological event, thousands of miles away, altered global climate, crippled agriculture, triggered a pandemic, and rewrote human history. It was not an asteroid from deep space or a cosmic collision, but the Earth's own internal fires that brought antiquity to its knees. The delicate balance that allows high culture, trade, and technology to flourish relies entirely on planetary stability. Strip away solar warmth and predictable harvests, and the proudest empires revert to a desperate fight for daily bread. The Dark Year exposes the fragile foundation of human ambition. As we look back through the lens of history and modern science, 536 AD is not merely a ghost story from the past. It is a profound mirror reflecting our contemporary relationship with the planet. Today, our globalized world is more interconnected and, in many ways, more systemic and vulnerable than ever before. A shock in one realm can still cascade rapidly across supply chains, food supplies, and public health. The lesson of the Dark Year is not one of total doom, but of profound existential humility. Human resilience allowed our species to endure the ice, the plague, and the loss of empires, eventually rebuilding from the ashes. But to navigate the uncertainties of our own future, we must remember how thin the thread of survival truly is. Beneath the bright lights of our modern cities, the shadow of 536 AD still whispers its quiet warning.